This is lecture 54B in the ABCs of Communism, Bolshevism 2018. That's the textbook version you're going to get next year. But I'm going ahead with this series because we have a lot of ground to cover before we complete the East Asian study. Now, last time we talked about the primitive communist migration from Northeast Asia into Northwest America. Now we're picking this story up where after the Wisconsin glaciation has disappeared and the sea levels have risen so that the 620-mile wide land bridge between Siberia and Alaska has been completely inundated. So what you have on the area we're looking at is Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia, a vast area, but it has the same Pacific and Arctic Ocean outlines 10,000 years ago as it does today. Now, hunters and gatherers in Yakutia and Baikal are the first things we're going to take a look at. In a few minutes I'm going to go over to our map and point to some of the major points so you'll know where they are. But Yakutia, that's Y-A-K-U-T-I-A, is that part of Russia which is northeasternmost on the continent. The million years of primitive communist prehistory of the vast areas of taiga and tundra east of the Urals to the Yenisei River and north of the Lake Baikal features inhabitants that were hunters and gatherers, and we've seen that. Despite the enormous geographic extent of this Siberian area, only minor local differences are apparent from the Urals to the Pacific and Arctic Oceans. Now we're going to talk about the origins of tribal pastoralism. Among these earliest people in eastern Siberia were those who occupied Yakutia, the contemporary Sakha Republic of the Russian Federation. Their culture area comprised most of what are today Baikal, Siberia, and the Republic of Mongolia. The first of these East Asian people to be named archaeologically were the carriers of the Syalak culture, that's S-Y-A-L-A-C-H. And the reason that we can distinguish them from their predecessors is they had a distinctive and diagnostic pottery, and so they can get a particular name, these particular hunter-gatherers, and they can be distinguished from the million years of preceding hunters and gatherers. They're distinctive, that is, they're archaeological sites, because there are thousands of these campsites across Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia, tens of thousands actually, and thousands that have been recorded. But until we arrive at this pottery-bearing Syalak culture time period about 6,000 years ago, 6,000 BP, we radiocarbon date these early ceramics to, we can't really tell much difference in any of the material culture assemblages. So, at any rate, their distinctive ceramic ware is dated by radiocarbon to 6,000 BP unless we assign them that beginning date. Their diagnostic pottery is decorated with net patterns and bands of puncture marks. Their remains include weapons and tools made from flint and bone and obsidian. Settlement remains include subterranean hearths and pits. Above ground buildings are absent. These Syalak people were hunters, gatherers, fisher folk. They were band organized, and they coalesced seasonally into larger groups. The Syalak culture transitions into the Belkachy culture without any clear archaeological break except in their pottery. And the Belkachy ceramic ware features cord decorations, stripes, and zigzag lines. So, from the Syalak, Belkachy peoples evolved tribal pastoralists, which is the primary subject of this morning's lecture. The tribal pastoral economy exhibited both penned animal and grazing animal components and an agricultural sector. This is the last of the primitive communist stages of social organization, and it is the equivalent of the stage of tribal agriculture elsewhere. That's important for those of you who are studying the socio-cultural laws of history. Northeastern Asian tribal pastoralism is best seen in the Chalcolithic, and I'm going to go into the definition of that term, which means copper stone. In the Glavkov culture, we'll go into that a little bit later. Their main rock art subjects are people hunting animals, and the hunting-gathering tribal economy of Northeast Asia now went through a simple chiefdom stage, where tribal pastoralists became simple chiefdom pastoral herders of cattle, sheep, goats, horses, and camels. The center of social organization, which had been the tribal council, was transformed. The new center featured a chief and her consigliere. Tribal council warehousing of surplus social product was now chiefdom warehousing of surplus social product. The first of the East Asian deer stele cultures are associated with the burial of these early chiefs. Now, the archaeological chiefdom transition is a matter which we want to take a close look at. The corpses for burial were laid prone on their backs with stone slabs covering the graves. One exception was in the area of the Onon River, O-N-O-N, where crouching graves are found, and grave goods and bone finds indicate that the inhabitants lived by hunting bears, fishing, hunting elk, beavers, and carvings on bones and rock faces indicate the importance of the hunt in their culture. Now, archaeologically, from the Neolithic or early in the Copperstone or Chalcolithic ages, sedentary pastoral groups occupied southwest Siberia, where there is evidence for copper use by 4800 BP. That same archaeology proves that the transition to the new economic system with its semi-sedentary life was very smooth. Subsequently, it spread to the Baikal region, where chiefdom organization was encouraged by the mercantile influence of northern China. Ceramic technology was common in Siberia after the onset of the Neolithic. In the Neolithic, ceramic potteries are mostly bulbous vessels with concave bases and folded edges. Later, flat bases become more common. In the eastern part of the West Siberian forest steppe, on the Ob, Irtysh, and Yenisei rivers, decoration consisted of comb patterns, puncture rows, and dimples arranged in long series or fields. Now, I want to take a look at Marshall Solon's comments on the pastoral dialectics of the simple chiefdom stage. He says, quote, "The stability of a pastoral population depends on the maintenance of a balance between 1. Pastures, 2. Animal population, and 3. Human population. The pastures available by their techniques of herding set a maximal limit to the total animal population that an area will support, while the patterns of nomadic production and consumption define a minimal limit to the size of the herd that will support a human household. In this double set of balances is summarized the special difficulty of establishing a population balance in a pastoral economy. The human population must be sensitive to imbalances between flocks and pastures," unquote. Now, this was taken directly from Stalin's Stone Age Economics 2004 edition that was done by Routledge in London and New York. Now, the ethnographic account upon which Solons relies is Frederick Barth's study of South Persian nomads. This group of Basieri in Iran was a simple chiefdom prehistorically, and thus is a prime target for comparative analysis. Now, what we have to explain is how, why, and when these people departed the band hunting and gathering stage for this more precarious lifestyle. In the archaeological record of Northeast Asia, this transformation from the primitive communist mentality and the hunting-gathering mode of production occurs by 5500 BP, before present, 5,500 years ago, in other words. Now we come to specifically to the simple chiefdoms of the Bronze Age. And this lecture is entitled Chiefdoms to Kingdoms in this part of the world. So the Yum-Yaktak culture occupied east and central Siberia from Yakutia in the northeast to Lake Baikal in the center and south from roughly 4,000 to 3,000 BP. It features a new kind of pottery with the upper side decorated by textiles, giving waffle-like impressions. By 3000 BP, bronze working had also reached as far east as Yakutia, marking the beginning there of the Ust mill culture. Now, the principal people of this early Bronze Age of 4000 or 3000 BP are known from the Ulakan Seglenyak archaeological culture of southern, southwestern, and western Yakutia, Its stamp imprint type of pottery differs from Oost Mill pottery that preceded it and resembles both ancestral Yemiaktok ceramics and ceramics made by immigrants. The Ulakan Seglaniak culture did not spread across all of Yakutia but occupied vast taiga regions in the basins of the Aldan River, the Olokma, the Viliui, and the Middelina rivers. Most immigrants were descendants of the Glaskovo people and entered Yakutia along the upper reaches of these rivers. From 2900 to 2100 BP, an independent culture developed on the Tamir Peninsula, which shared its basic features with the Oost Mill culture. The Middle Bronze Age Andronovo culture, on the other side of this culture area, on the western side in other words, features pottery decorated with meander bands, herringbone patterns, and triangles. These ceramic types endured even into the Iron Age in West Siberia, although professional specialization of ceramic mass production included a stark decline in superfluous decoration. Now, advanced theocratic chiefdoms emerge and are marked everywhere with the appearance of what are called deerstone megaliths. Then the deerstone megaliths appear as the remains of the Siberian and Mongolian advanced theocratic chiefdom stage. These megaliths feature anthropomorphic grave stelae decorated with deer. They are found in South Siberia, the Trans-Baikal, and Mongolia. Petroglyphs show the bodies of important people tattooed with animal motifs. The early dating of these art pieces from southern Siberia proves an autochthonous steppe origin. The broad-spectrum hunters and gatherers made the transition to horseback from the ankle express rather early. Hunting and gathering tribes and tribal pastoralists soon evolved into simple chiefdoms, and the number of animals belonging to family units was kept to the minimum necessary for the upkeep of each family, and the rest were sent to the chief herself at the center of the simple chiefdom. Horses in particular were closely watched so that no more existed per family than one per hunter, and the rest were delivered to the center. Chiefs eventually constructed large mobile tent towns, and these evolved into impressive mobile urban centers. The impressive part helped keep the rubes in line in the advanced theocratic chiefdom stage. New and varied tasks were associated with building and maintaining mobile tent towns, as well as searching for and preparing new grazing areas for horse herds. In other words, the process accelerated professional specialization, and in any economy, agricultural or pastoral, intense professional specialization creates ranks, not yet classes. The tent is the pastoral household. In agricultural villages, it is the family farms that are the basic units of society. In pastoral villages, it is the tent, which is the basic unit of society. In the agricultural tribal village, the family farm keeps what is an agreed-upon amount per family member and sends the rest of its produce to the center, that is, to the chief and her consigliere. In the pastoral mobile tent village, it is the tent that keeps an agreed-upon produce, including the mobile food represented in the flocks of sheep, goats, horses, and cattle, and sends the rest to the center, that is, to the chief and her consigliere. The ATCs become class, state, slave-based kingdoms. In western Siberia and Mongolia, the highly ranked theocratic chiefdom societies replaced the simple chiefdoms in the East Asian early Bronze Age. These ATCs created mobile hell-on-wheels towns. The reason I use that phrase is from the AMC Hell on Wheels series, which is on Netflix, where you have the Union Pacific Railroad being built, and the towns housing all of the workers and support people that range from preachers to prostitutes are packed up and moved as the train keeps moving westward. It's a way of visualizing the fact that these simple chiefdoms had to have mobile towns, and the social differentiation within them is indicated by differences in housing and sumptuary goods. The ranks were distinguished by differential access to the articles of production and even later by the differentiation between haves and have-nots. It was then only a hop, skip, and a jump to title deed ownership of both things and means. In other words, ranks will become classes, and sheep, goat, horse herding will evolve from what was meant to impress the masses. In its new context, the pastoral economy has a state apparatus, that is, the police and army, in the hands of kings. Most differently from agricultural economies we are used to seeing in upward transition, is that the pastoral peoples of Northeast Asia built tent towns as opposed to urban brick and adobe towns. Horse herds were given a new task in the context of warfare. Now, the early Bronze Age runs from 4,400 to 3,800 BP, years ago. After 4,500 BP, bronze working had reached western Siberia, in the eastern Ural foothills, and the Andronovo culture settlements of the Archean, Oligocene, and Cetacea are particularly notable. This is all in the western part of Siberia. They have the continuing evidence for mobile town urbanization. These Andronovo Bronze Age cultures occupied the valleys of the Ob, Irtysh, and the Lake Baikal region, and eventually Yakutia. The Middle Bronze Age extends from 3,800 to 3,500 BP. The Andronovo culture in the Middle Bronze Age extended from the West Siberian region to the east, reaching the Yenisei Valley. So that covers almost all of the western part of Siberia. And this development features stabilization of ranked social differentiation. The Late Bronze Age kingdoms from 3,500 to 2,800 BP exist in the societies of the Wusun, Tian Shan, and Zetsu, where there now appear a king and a noble class. With the beginnings of the Late Bronze Age, the cultural transition via chiefdoms, intermediate stages, had taken place. And we can see it in a variety of archaeological ways. The Andronovo culture would dissolve altogether, and further proof of all of this lies in the successors' kingdoms producing an entirely new form of pottery, and this new pottery is mass-produced via professional specialization that created utilitarian wares. Simultaneously, these new Siberian societies developed new forms of bronze working, and again, specialist craftsmen organized in factories produced the bronzeware. These changes were pronounced in the Lake Baikal region that had become a major profit center because of water-carried trade. Now, we want to go to the discussion of the dawn of Iron Age slavery. The cultural continuity on the Ob River continued as the Iron Age began in Siberia. Local ceramic styles continue even with the professional specialization of mass production. The semi-sedentary pastoralist society of the late Bronze Age kingdoms is replaced. Mobile horse armies are the main forms of the state. They immediately dominate the region until modern times. Slavery is the new common denominator for the cost of labor. The Iron Age began in Yakutia around 2400 BP. The adoption of iron weapons and tools is a major change in the technology of their pastoral culture. It marks a definite beginning of slavery and the replacement of advanced theocratic chiefdom social organization. In this part of the world, the economy in transition was pastoral rather than agricultural. The agricultural revolution and its aftermath are what we have gotten used to as the predicate to the advancement of humanity through chiefdom transitional stages to the servitude epoch. In other words, it is a primarily agricultural mode of production we have seen in the main areas of origin of slavery, that is nuclear China, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and the Central Andes. For that matter, the agricultural economy we see in so many of the secondary centers where chiefdoms emerge as the predecessors of class and state societies, such as the USA Eastern Woodlands and Southwest, are cases in point. The preceding cultural development in the Lake Baikal region, where the circumstances were similar to those in Yakutia, was uniformly similar. With the appearance of the late Bronze Age slab grave culture, we see the first major deviation. Here, multi-layer storage pits with hearths, waste pits, and storage pits, but no remains of buildings continue. The Baikal pottery was similar to that in Yakutia and shows a parallel course of development. The social changes are proven in the archaeological finds where the new elite was buried in richly furnished kurgans. Completely new forms of art glorifying class rule developed. In the damper steppes up to the north, the sedentary pastoralist culture of the late Bronze Age developed under the influence of the material culture of Xiongnu. The Xiongnu were evolving into tent urban settlements, as were those of the Tishitsa that formed the late Urman culture in West Siberia. The same tent urbanization pattern is now seen in the settlements to the north of the Xiongnu Empire. In the Central Asian steppes, Turkic language groups become detectable in the AD 400s. Over the following centuries, they expand to the north and west, till eventually they brought the whole of southern Siberia under their control. The area further north was occupied by the speakers of the Uralic and Paleo-Siberian languages. The pre-tent urbanization had no permanent above-ground structures. These predominant building materials were for above-ground housing in prehistoric North Asia were wood with stone foundations. Most houses were small, rectangular or circular in floor plan. The structures sunk less than 3 feet into the earth. Less common are oval or polygonal floor plans. The structure of the roofs may have been pitched, wooden constructions, or saddle roofs. In many sites, a small corridor-like porch was built in front of the entrance, and one or more hearths occur. Floodplain edges and lakesides were preferred settlement locations, and settlements could take entirely different forms through time and over spatial areas, but the small village-like groups of houses are found in great numbers in all these sedentary cultures. Some sites exhibit small groups of houses. Others have houses within fortified city-like settlements. Still others feature housing within elevated fortress complexes. In some cases, such as the Chalcolithic settlement of Botai on the Ishim River, settlements experienced substantial expansion. It was not unusual for larger settlements to have walls and extramural graveyards, as in the case of the West Siberian settlements of Sintashta and Tishitsha. The inner space of these city-like settlements was densely and regularly packed with rectangular houses, indicating a form of town planning. The fortified settlements in elevated locations, like those located in the Minushinsk Hollow and the Khakassia in the Bronze and Iron Ages, are usually distinguished from these settlements by their small size. Their purpose is still unclear. They may have been temporary refuges, the seats of elites, or sanctuaries. Now for a few comments on the sedentary pastoral economy. Pastoralism dominated the economy of the sedentary populations in prehistoric Siberia and Mongolia and Central Asia. Cattle were intensively farmed in all cultures, as were sheep and goats, and the raising of horses became very significant in western Siberia, particularly with the beginning of the Iron Age. Xiongnu people had domesticated pigs and dogs, and hunting and fishing were initially an important supplement, although they did lose significance over time. Archaeologically recovered tools and remains of irrigation systems prove a wide use of agricultural cereals. The best evidence is that recovered in the southernmost cultures, as in the remains from the Wusun, the Tian Shan, and the Zetsu. There, as in the northern parts of the Xiongnu territory, millet was cultivated, as traces of wheat and rice have been found. Millet seeds are also found in graves from Tuva, possibly indicating that settled agriculturalists might have been responsible for the area's metalworking, and that they existed alongside the horse nomads. From the Chalcolithic period forward, ore mining and metallurgy also occurred, and this is shown by finds of slags, tools, and workshops in various cultural contexts. I want to make a few comments about the Chalcolithic, the Copper Stone Age, the funerals that they had in the evolving kurgan. Commoners in the West Siberian Chalcolithic were buried, Chalcolithic again means Copper Stone Age, were buried in simple flat graves with the corpse laid flat on its back. Highest ranked persons in the chiefdom were buried in kurgans. A kurgan was a circular burial mound constructed over a pit grave. It contained grave vessels, weapons, and the bodies of horses, as well as a single human body. The first kurgans originated in the Russian steppes, spreading into eastern, central, and northern Europe after 3000 BC, that is 5,000 years ago. In the advanced theocratic chiefdom stage of the early Bronze Age, kurgans were erected for the first time. These early Bronze Age people were members from a newly developed warrior rank cum class. This is obvious by the grave goods interred with them. These men were not buried in simple pits, but in wooden or stone kurgans. In the Middle Bronze Age phase of the Andronovo culture of West Siberia, kurgans are found but without differentiation of their grave goods. The corpse was interred in a crouched position or cremated. In later Karasuk culture over the Middle Yenisei River, the tombs include rectangular stone enclosures which were further developed into the stone-cornered kurgans characteristic of the area by the Tagar culture in the Iron Age. A special position belongs to the early Iron Age slab grave culture in the Transbaikal area. Here the dead were often interred in stone cist graves. The burial of corpses lying on their backs, which was practiced in West Siberia, continued in the developing Scythian cultures of South Siberia, which is dealt with separately along with other horse nomad cultures below. Only isolated sanctuaries with many burnt offering places are found near the necropolis of the Chalcolithic Afanasevo culture in South Siberia. They consisted of simple stone circles containing ashes, pottery, animal bones, and tools made of copper, stone, and bone, and the many circular buildings containing wooden stakes and walls in the necropolis near the early Bronze Age settlement of Sintashta are probably cult buildings, that is, religious buildings. Now, the Chalcolithic or Copper Stone Age, a few specific comments on this terminology. Copper works best as metal when it is alloyed with tin to give bronze. However, some copper ores contain enough of one or more other elements to be as hard as bronze when smelted. Thus, there is, in many parts of the world, Old World, a brief phase between Stone Age implements and Bronze implements where both materials were used, and that phase is said to occupy a period which came to be called the Copper Stone Age, or in the Greek and Latin versions, Chalcolithic. Now, for a few comments on the dawn of history. Reliable historical evidence for the area first appears about 1000 BC, or 3,000 years ago. Greek and Chinese historical sources, not long thereafter, refer to Siberian and Mongolian history. These are the first Iron Age historical accounts, and it is archaeology we must turn to for data on Iron Age formation in Siberia and Mongolia. For earlier times and the northern part of Siberia, only archaeological evidence is available. Maria Gimbutas relates hypothetical language families to archaeological cultures in her study of the Kurgans and does an impressive presentation. At any rate, by 1000 BC or 3,000 years ago, neighboring literate cultures encountered the people of the steppe. In the steppes, north of the Black Sea and east of the Caspian Sea, Greek, Assyrian, and Persian sources describe horse nomads identified as a speaker of Iranian languages. The first reports from ancient China of the nomad armies north of China also date from 1000 BC, that is 3,000 years ago, along with various unidentified groups from Shang and Zhou dynasty text. The Xiongnu are most important. That's spelled Xiongnu. Based on personal names and titles transmitted by the Chinese sources, different scholars have attempted three hypotheses as to the language of the Xiongnu, which became an important empire. One is that it was an early Turkic language, another that it was a Proto-Mongolic language, and a third that it was a Yeniseian language. But at any rate, between AD 500 and 1000, the Iranian peoples disappeared from Siberia and Mongolia, and there placed Turkic language-speaking peoples expanded across the region between the eastern edge of Europe and northeastern Siberia. In that same period, in the areas to the north of the Asiatic steppes, speakers of Uralic, Turkic, and Paleo-Siberian languages settled. Now, the Iron Age steppe kingdoms. Horse nomad kingdoms characterized the society of the Asiatic, Central, and Eastern steppe until modern times. By 3,000 years ago, settled pastoralists lived in the arid regions of Central Asia. The early kingdoms replaced them in the course of the first millennium BC, that is from 3,000 to 2,000 years ago. The transition to the sedentary groups further north was fluid in many places. The inhabitants of the Minnusinsk Hollow remained settled pastoralists even in the Iron Age. As a matter of interest, it was to this ancient village of Minnusinsk that V.I. Lenin would be exiled, and where he would finish writing The Development of Capitalism in Russia and formulate his plans for Bolshevism. At any rate, the Minnusinsk Iron Age early cultural development shows strong affinities to the neighboring nomad kingdoms. When Joseph Stalin left his abode north of the Arctic Circle in Siberia on New Year's Day, 1917, he traveled straight south to Achinsk on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. That is not far, relatively speaking, from the Minnusinsk town in Krasnoyarsk Oblast, which is where Stalin had applied for temporary residence in order to be closer to Petrograd on his release date. Before he got an answer, the February 1917 revolution swept away the Tsarist regime, and with it the Okhrana, that is the secret police. Stalin thus traveled for 4 days from Achinsk to Petrograd and took his place as the senior Bolshevik leader. I think at this point I'm going to stop and we're going to take a look at the map, the same map we used last time. When you get your book, you'll have a much more detailed presentation for those who are interested in the precise locations of all of these sites. But for our purposes this morning, I'm going to just use this brief discussion now to point out a few important geographic locations. Let me just point out here, you'll recall that last time we had a land bridge that went clear across and that was 620 miles wide, went clear across here. Every time the ice melts, that land bridge is inundated. So the last so-called, what we call the fifth glacial advance, major one that we call Wisconsin in North America, melted and then created this more or less contemporary, and hasn't changed much since then, Pacific and Arctic Ocean coast. So we have, this is Yakutia, this part of Russia. Over here we have the Urals Mountains, and down here we have Lake Baikal. Over here the Andronovo culture that we were talking about. So when you get your book, you'll be able to see where all of these cultures are, and if you're that interested, you can even identify exact locations on the in Siberia where some of these particular archaeological sites are located. And just one more interesting, I think, since we already mentioned Lenin and Stalin and what was happening there, in north of the Arctic, Stalin got dumped off north of the Arctic Circle 7 years earlier. It was his 7th trip to Siberia, and the government, of course, was hoping that he would die up there. But he didn't. He lived by hunting and fishing and surviving. This is an area which is more or less like northwest North America, north of Whitehorse. It's north of the Arctic Circle. Now, to get to Petrograd, which is what which is way over here, which is what at that time St. Petersburg was called. That is in 1917. The Tsar had renamed St. Petersburg as Petrograd for what he called patriotic reasons. To get there, he had to go clear down to the Trans-Siberian Railroad in Achinsk, and that's where he was when he made an application to the Okhrana, the secret police in Okhrana, to move to Krasnoyarsk so that he would be in a better position to make the 4-day trip to Petrograd when his release came within a few weeks. Before that could happen, the February Revolution swept away the entire Tsarist government, including the Okhrana, So there's nobody to issue anybody any permits or to enforce anything. So he just got on the train and made the 4-day trip to Petrograd. And there he became the senior leader of the Bolshevik Party, because he was the senior leader, and he took over the reins of control there, and in the party leadership itself, and in the Petrograd Soviet. We've already talked about that. We'll be talking about it again more as time goes on. But at any rate, Minusинsk is right next to, in the same Krasnoyar vicinity, and that's where Lenin had spent his 3 years in Siberia in exile, Lenin and his wife. As soon as his freedom date came, he jumped on the railroad and made his way to Zurich. All right, so those are some interesting highlights of what's been going on in that part of the world. Now, to finish up this lecture, I'm going to go over here to the computer again. I want to go back to the city-state of Xiongnu, when it was before it was a state, when it was an advanced theocratic chiefdom in the Trans-Baikal region, where it shows characteristics of both horse nomads and settled pastoralists and farmers. The situation in northern Tian Shan and Zetsu is remarkable. In the early Iron Age, the nomadic Sakas formed their kingdom there, but the region was subsequently taken over by the Wusun kingdom. Now, Xiongnu eventually subdued them, but that wasn't the end of the other kingdoms. There is a continuing struggle among these pastoralists in their class-state phase, where slavery is the basic socio-cultural stage of evolution. A continuing struggle among them, exactly the same way as there is among the early states and kingdoms of the New World, that is in Mesoamerica and Peru, and of course in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and most importantly in China, because as it turns out, China is going to be the type for the transformation of advanced theocratic chiefdoms into early slave kingdoms. Why is that? Well, it's because the reason we have always looked at Egypt and Mesopotamia was historical. That's where archaeologists from the West that write the histories first became aware of the existence of these advanced complex societies, and of course I won't go through the whole history of how they worked that out. And then in the New World we have the studies of Richard McNeish and Associates on the origins of agriculture, and which of course you have to have the food for the people to build these societies, and that has evolved into our studies of the Central Andes and Mesoamerica. In each of these areas, the state that emerges because there's a specific challenge, and the ruling ranks use that challenge to justify putting armed force in their own very private hands. That challenge ranges from things such as the shortage of hard stone and obsidian in Mesoamerica in one part, so they have to trade with the other part, justifies the creation of trade groups and armed force that naturally has to protect them from banditry along the way, which is constantly going to be happening. Or in Peru, it's the need to deal with the high altitude areas where your agriculture is taking place, and the coastal regions, so you have to build roads. In the central, along Mesopotamia and Egypt, people would wonder why in the world would these groups go into such a hostile area, and the region is that a justification for that might have been that the powerful ranks of the rulers within these early advanced theocratic chiefdoms could tell their people, well, you'll be safer there, we won't have to worry about people raiding us because we'll be protected by the deserts, and we can handle the desert because we have professional specialization, and we have irrigation, and we can farm as long as we use the techniques we've already developed, and all we have to do is we use our state authority to be sure that everybody does what they're supposed to do, which is what we're going to do. Now, but those are all challenges which are specific to peculiar circumstances. In China, you have the classic situation where you have huge numbers of people in an area of central China between the Wangho and the Yangtze rivers, which is perfect for agriculture, and huge amounts of surplus social product are produced in the tribal agricultural and simple chiefdom, and eventually you have to have advanced theocratic chiefdoms, and of course then they go through the same stage, but the challenge there is the huge population number. And eventually we're going to see that that replaces it. And China, that the central China becomes the most important area for origin of state and class society. And these, of course, what's happening in China right now has also created the possibility for people to take a closer look at the history that we have just taken a closer look at. So in the past, most Americans would have had the idea that, or most North Americans, that, well, we had a lot of dinosaurs in Mongolia, and then there were these Genghis Khan guys. Well, actually what you've seen is, that's completely false. Yeah, there were a lot of dinosaurs there 65 million years ago, but the important thing is that in the last 10,000 years, Siberia, Mongolia, Central Asia went through exactly the same stages as had the rest of the world, but that the cultures there were pastoral as opposed to agricultural. So I've had to work that out so that I can present it to you in this morning's lecture. And of course, when you get your book, you're going to see all of this in great detail. The early nomadic cultures used to be referred to collectively by Orientalists using the term Scythian. This is the ancient Greek term for a group of horse nomads living north of the Black Sea, which is completely on the other side of the continent. However, in a wider sense, it was then used to refer to all horse nomads in the Eurasian steppe. The student of these early years needs to be aware that the term has been used rather sloppily in the literature. Anyway, after AD 200, we see the beginnings of the Hunnic Sarmatian period, named after two nomadic groups from southern Russia. In AD 500, the Gokturks established their Khaganate. And then we have the period of imperial slavery. And I'm going to end up this morning's lecture with a discussion of what we're going to have next, in the next and final lecture in this, well, actually it won't be. I think we're going to do 2 more lectures in this part of the world. Mass horse mobile armies unleashed a powerful new dynamic in Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia. Rulers now moved entire societies, not just their troops, across the steppe in great numbers. The neighboring sedentary cultures were immediately absorbed. Even China was threatened by the Xiongnu Empire, as were the ancient states of modern Iran, also challenged by Xiongnu rivals in the Massagethe and Sakis kingdoms. Even the Roman Empire was confronted by mobile horse armies of one or several kingdoms, come empires, alone or in alliance. And it's this continental imperial slavery that our next lecture will be about, and that will bring us up to Russian feudalism, and we'll take that right on up to the course of the Bolshevik Revolution. So with that, we're going to finish. That is the end of this lecture 54B, and that will be lecture chapter 55 in next year's edition of the ABCs of Communism, Volume 3, Communism in East Asia.